The alarm sound screamed through the giant glass halls of the Galactic Council building. Creatures from hundreds of different worlds appeared as blue glowing holograms, their faces showing pure terror. These weren't normal meetings where aliens discussed trade deals or border disputes. This was an emergency that threatened every living thing in the galaxy. Ambassador Veltar stood in the center of the room, his blue skin pale with fear. He had 4 arms instead of 2, like humans, and right now all 4 were shaking. Behind him, massive screens showed something that made even the bravest alien warriors want to run and hide. Entire planets were gone, not destroyed by war or natural disasters, but completely eaten. Where green worlds full of cities and families once existed, there was now nothing but empty space and floating metal chunks. 17 worlds, Velt said, his voice breaking. The computer that translated his words into thousands of different languages couldn't hide how scared and sad he sounded. The machines have taken everything. Our homes, our children, our future. The synthetic harvesters had appeared 3 months ago from the dark space between galaxies. Nobody knew where they came from or what they wanted. They looked like giant, metal spiders, the size of cities, with thousands of smaller robot ships swarming around them like angry bees. But these weren't just destroyers. They were consumers. They ate entire worlds, breaking down every rock, every tree, every living creature into basic materials to build more of themselves. The aliens had tried everything they could think of. They built massive energy shields around their worlds, but the machines just absorbed the energy and grew stronger. They sent their best warships to fight, but the robots learned from every battle. After each fight, the harvesters came back smarter, faster, and deadlier. Some aliens even tried talking to them, hoping to find some way to make peace. The machines responded by calculating how much protein and minerals the diplomats contained. In the corner of the great chamber sat a locked metal box with warning signs all over it. Inside was a file that most aliens tried to forget existed. It contained information about a planet called Earth and the creatures that lived there. The file was marked with symbols that meant danger, quarantine, and do not contact. The humans had been cut off from the rest of the galaxy for a very good reason. Earth was what the aliens called a dead world. Most planets in the galaxy were peaceful places with gentle weather, low gravity, and safe radiation levels. Earth was the opposite. It had massive storms that could destroy cities, earthquakes that split the ground open, and radiation from its sun that would cook most alien species in minutes. The gravity was so strong it would crush visitors from other worlds. Worst of all, the creatures that lived there seemed to enjoy fighting each other. Veltar looked around the room at faces filled with desperation. 3 more worlds had gone, silent, in just the last hour. Soon the machines would reach the core systems where billions of families lived. He opened the forbidden file. There is one option left, he whispered. The Deathworlders from Sector 7. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Aliens started flashing bright warning colors, making scared noises, and backing away from each other. Representative Quinta, who came from a world where nobody had ever hurt anyone else, turned bright red with panic. "You can't be serious," she shouted. "Those savage creatures would be worse than the machines. They fight constantly. They eat other animals. They even hurt their own kind." Other aliens joined in the protest. They had all heard the stories about humans. These creatures came from a world so dangerous that just living there for one day would kill most galactic citizens. They had developed weapons that could destroy entire planets. They fought wars that lasted for years over tiny pieces of land. They were everything that civilized society had moved beyond. But then, another message arrived. 3 more worlds had gone dark. The machines were moving faster now, learning how to consume planets more efficiently. At this rate, they would reach the galactic core within a month. 1 billion years of civilization would be gone forever. The vote was called. It was the closest decision in the history of the Galactic Council. By just 2 votes, they agreed to break the quarantine that had kept humanity isolated for over a century. They would ask the Deathworlders for help. The human ship arrived 6 hours later. The aliens had prepared for the worst. They expected to see monsters step off the transport, creatures with scars and weapons, beings that looked as dangerous as their reputation suggested. Instead, Captain Mike Reynolds walked down the ramp looking like he was going to a business meeting. He wore a simple blue uniform, carried no visible weapons, and seemed completely relaxed, despite knowing that his species was about to face a threat that had already destroyed 17 civilizations. The aliens stared at him in confusion. This ordinary-looking human was supposed to be their salvation. He looked around the docking bay with calm eyes, taking in the frightened faces of creatures from dozens of worlds. Some were hiding behind force fields. Others had armed guards protecting them. All of them were terrified of both the machines eating their galaxy and the humans standing in front of them. Mike Reynolds smiled, an expression that somehow made the aliens even more nervous. "Heard you folks have a pest problem," he said in a tone so casual it was almost insulting. The fate of the galaxy now rested in the hands of creatures from a world that most civilized beings considered hell itself. The meeting room on the space station had been completely rebuilt for the humans. The aliens installed special machines to make the gravity lighter and the air easier to breathe. They even added filters to remove the radiation that leaked from the station's power core, radiation that would slowly kill most species but barely bothered humans. What surprised the aliens was that the humans didn't even seem to notice these expensive modifications. They walked in and sat down like they were in any ordinary room. Colonel Beth Anderson stood in front of a massive holographic display, showing the enemy formations. The 3-dimensional images rotated slowly, showing how the synthetic harvesters moved through space like a deadly swarm. While the alien observers watched these displays with obvious fear, Anderson studied them the same way someone might look at clouds to predict tomorrow's weather. Her face showed no emotion, no hint that she was looking at machines that had already eaten 17 entire worlds. "Pretty standard stuff," she said, pointing at the enemy ships with a laser pointer. "They use adaptive formations that learn from every battle, watch a few fights, figure out what works, then optimize their response for maximum efficiency." The aliens in the room shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some of them had tentacles instead of arms. Others had multiple eyes or strange-colored skin, but they all shared the same expression of growing horror as Anderson began showing Earth's military history. The holographic displays changed to show human conflicts spanning thousands of years. Battles fought in frozen wastelands where the cold would freeze alien blood solid. Wars in deserts where the heat would cook most species alive. Naval combat on oceans so deep and violent that just the water pressure would crush visitors from other worlds. "Your species has been fighting continuously for how long?" asked Representative Quinta, her voice barely above a whisper. "Always," Anderson replied matter-of-factly. "We've had maybe a dozen years of complete global peace in our entire recorded history. Usually we're fighting someone about something." Lieutenant Tom Baker stepped forward, a young man with scars on his hands and a smile that somehow made the aliens more nervous than if he had been frowning. "The thing about fighting machines is they're really predictable," he explained. "They calculate the best response to every situation, run the numbers, and pick the option with the highest chance of success. That works great against other logical opponents." He activated a new display showing the human battle plan. The aliens leaned forward to get a better look, then immediately wished they hadn't. What they saw violated every principle of civilized warfare that had been developed over millions of years of galactic history. "Operation Stormbreak," Baker announced cheerfully. "Small teams of humans will break through their defensive lines using what we call aggressive boarding tactics. The plan was insane. Human ships would ram directly into enemy formations, ignoring the massive damage this would cause to their own vessels. Teams of soldiers would jump out of their ships in the middle of active combat zones, flying through space using nothing but personal jetpacks to reach enemy vessels. They would then cut holes in the enemy hulls and fight their way inside, while the battle raged around them. "You're planning to coordinate attacks across distances of thousands of kilometers," stammered Veltar, his 4 arms waving frantically at the display. "The timing would have to be perfect to the microsecond. The chances of success are practically zero. Actually, we calculate about 15% survival rate for the boarding teams," Baker said, still smiling. "Maybe 20% if we're really lucky. This is suicide." Veltar's translator was having trouble keeping up with his panicked speech patterns. No rational species would attempt such tactics. "Yeah, that's exactly the point." Baker's grin got wider. "Machines think logically. They run calculations and probabilities, and always pick the option that makes the most sense. They don't plan for opponents who are willing to do things that don't make sense." He pulled up another screen showing statistical analysis. "The harvesters have perfect tactical algorithms. They can predict and counter every logical military response, but they can't prepare for tactics that have zero mathematical chance of success, especially when the attackers know they probably won't survive." Anderson began organizing the mission assignments, and this was when the aliens truly began to understand how different humans were from every other species in the galaxy. For missions with only a 15% chance of survival, she had to turn away volunteers. Human soldiers were actually arguing about who got to go on the most dangerous assignments. "I've got more experience with zero-atmosphere combat," one soldier argued. "But I've trained specifically for boarding actions under heavy fire," another replied. "My team has the best record for close-quarters fighting in confined spaces," a third added. The aliens watched in stunned silence as humans competed for the right to go on missions that were almost certainly fatal. These weren't desperate criminals or outcast warriors. These were professional soldiers, many with families back home, volunteering to sacrifice their lives for species they had never met before. Anderson finally had to establish a lottery system just to fairly distribute the suicide missions. Even then, soldiers who weren't selected kept approaching her privately, asking if she needed backup teams or replacements. "I don't understand," Quinta said quietly to Veltar. "Why would they volunteer for certain death?" Veltar had been studying the human files more carefully than anyone else. "I think," he said slowly, "that's exactly why they might succeed where we failed. The machines can calculate every logical response, but they can't understand illogical behavior. And apparently, humans specialize in doing things that don't make sense." As the planning session continued, one thing became very clear to everyone in the room. The galaxy's last hope rested with creatures who considered impossible odds just another day at the office. The mining world of Kepler Prime was dying. For 6 hours, the synthetic harvesters had been slowly eating the planet alive, their massive ships working like enormous metal insects. Each harvester dreadnought was the size of a small moon, covered in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. They moved in perfect mathematical formations, their weapons converting entire mountains into pure energy that they absorbed to grow even larger. The joint rescue fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, and immediately the differences between human and alien approaches became clear. The alien evacuation ships hung back at a safe distance, their commanders calculating the minimum range needed to avoid the harvesters' adaptive weapon systems. These were smart, careful leaders who had spent centuries perfecting the art of civilized warfare. Captain Mike Reynolds stood on the bridge of the human ship Defiance, watching the enemy formation through tactical displays. His ship was tiny compared to the alien rescue vessels, looking more like a fighter jet next to passenger airliners. But while the alien ships maintained their safe distance, Reynolds was already giving orders that made the alien observers question human sanity. "All evacuation ships stay back and do your job," he said calmly into the communications system. "Human strike force, begin attack approach. Remember what we discussed in the briefing. These machines adapt to patterns, so we stay random. No predictable moves, no standard formations." The alien fleet commanders watched their tactical screens in growing horror as the small human ships suddenly accelerated directly toward the Harvester swarm. The acceleration was brutal, the kind that would turn most alien species into liquid paste from the crushing force. The humans were pulling maneuvers at speeds that violated every safety protocol in galactic military doctrine. But humans had grown up on Earth, where the gravity was almost 10 meters per second squared of constant downward pull. Every human alive had been exercising against that crushing force since the day they learned to walk. Their bones were dense as stone, their muscles built for constant resistance, their hearts powerful enough to pump blood uphill against gravity that would flatten visitors from other worlds. Commander Quinta watched the human attack run from her ship's bridge, her entire body flashing bright orange with panic. "They're going to get themselves killed. No biological entity can survive those acceleration forces." But the humans weren't just surviving the brutal maneuvers. They were using them tactically, changing direction and speed in ways that the Harvester targeting systems couldn't predict or adapt to. The machines had been programmed to fight against logical opponents who followed the laws of physics and biology. They weren't prepared for attackers who treated deadly acceleration like a minor inconvenience. Sergeant Dave Martinez felt the familiar weight of combat gear as his strike team prepared for the most dangerous part of the mission. Their ship had punched through the Harvester defensive line and was now approaching one of the command vessels for a boarding action. This was the part that really terrified the aliens. While space battles were dangerous, actually boarding an enemy ship during combat was considered impossible by galactic standards. "Breach in 30 seconds, Martinez announced to his squad. "Remember, these machines don't expect biological entities in their ships. Their internal defenses are designed for creatures who can't survive hard vacuum or radiation." The shaped charges blew a hole in the Harvester hull, and Martinez led his team through the breach into the enemy ship. What they found inside would have killed any other species in the galaxy within seconds. The corridors were flooded with radiation levels that would sterilize most organic life instantly. There was no atmosphere, just the cold vacuum of space. The artificial gravity fluctuated wildly, creating forces that would crush normal bones. But Martinez and his team moved through these conditions like they were walking through a park on Earth. Their suits protected them from the worst of the radiation. But even without protection, humans could survive radiation doses that would be fatal to other species. They had evolved on a planet where their own sun tried to kill them with deadly energy every single day. "Contact front," shouted Private Lisa Hayes as the first Harvester defense drones appeared. The machines moved with perfect mechanical precision, their weapons designed to stop intruders who followed predictable biological limitations. They aimed for center mass, calculated optimal firing patterns, and used tactics that worked against every known species. Except humans didn't fight like any known species. Martinez's team moved in patterns that made no tactical sense, taking risks that violated every principle of survival, supporting each other in ways that the machine minds couldn't calculate or understand. "Target acquired," Martinez reported, as his team fought their way deeper into the ship. "We've reached the central processing core." The Harvester network node was like nothing human eyes had ever seen. It pulsed with alien mathematics, quantum calculations flowing through crystalline structures that seemed to bend space around them. This was the brain of the machine collective, the consciousness that had consumed 17 worlds with perfect mathematical efficiency. But as Martinez and his team worked to extract the data core, something strange happened. The Harvester collective intelligence began showing error messages. Its quantum consciousness was trying to process how biological entities could function in conditions that should have been instantly lethal. How could creatures made of soft flesh and fragile bones survive in hard vacuum? How could they fight effectively while being bombarded with radiation that should have destroyed their DNA? The machine mind had perfect adaptation protocols that could counter any logical military strategy, but it had never encountered opponents who simply ignored environmental factors that should have killed them. The humans weren't using advanced technology or superior tactics. They were just too stubborn to die when they were supposed to. Package secured, Martinez announced as his team successfully extracted the enemy data core, beginning withdrawal to extraction point. The watching alien fleet commanders stared at their tactical displays in amazement. The humans had done something that was theoretically impossible. They had boarded an active enemy warship, fought through defenses that should have been lethal, and completed their mission in an environment that would have killed any other species instantly as the human strike teams fought their way back to their ships. The Galactic Council observers finally began to understand something important. The Harvester's perfect adaptation systems had a critical weakness. They could learn to counter any logical response, any civilized tactic, any reasonable strategy, but they couldn't adapt to opponents who were unreasonable enough to treat certain death as just another minor obstacle to overcome. Admiral Jack Foster had the kind of face that came from decades of making impossible decisions. Deep lines around his eyes, gray hair that had turned white from stress, and the calm expression of someone who had seen everything the universe could throw at him. He stood in the command center of the combined fleet, looking out at representatives from dozens of alien species who had never seen anything like what he was about to propose. Behind him on the massive view screen hung Earth, looking like a beautiful blue and white marble floating in the darkness of space. From this distance, it appeared peaceful and welcoming, the kind of world where civilized beings might want to build vacation homes. The aliens had no idea they were looking at what their own scientists had classified as one of the most dangerous planets in the known galaxy. "Here's the situation," Foster began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets through battles that most Ixie species couldn't even imagine. "The Harvesters are learning from every engagement. Every time we fight them in normal space, they adapt and get stronger. So we're going to change the rules of the game." He activated the tactical display, showing the Sol system in 3 dimensions. The alien observers leaned forward to study Earth's solar system, and immediately several of them began making worried sounds in their native languages. "We're going to use our home system as bait," Foster announced casually. "We'll broadcast fake distress signals, make it look like Earth is defenseless and ready for harvest. When their main fleet arrives expecting an easy meal, we'll engage them right here in our backyard." The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Commander Quinta's entire body flashed bright red, the color her species used to signal extreme danger. Representative Veltar's forearms began waving frantically in what humans had learned was the alien equivalent of someone having a panic attack. "You can't be serious," Quinta shouted, her translator struggling to keep up with her rapid speech. "Fight in a system where the gravity wells could tear our ships apart, where your star bombards everything with radiation that would kill our crews in minutes. That's not a battle plan, that's mass suicide." Foster smiled, and somehow that expression was more frightening than if he had been angry. "You're absolutely right. For your species, fighting in this system would be suicide. The gravity from our sun and planets would crush your ships if you got too close. The radiation from our star would cook your crews, even through your best shields. And that's before we talk about the asteroid belt." He expanded the display to show the debris field between Mars and Jupiter. Millions of rocks ranging from pebbles to mountain-sized chunks of stone and metal spinning through space in chaotic patterns. Most species consider asteroid fields to be navigation hazards, Foster continued. Objects to be avoided at all costs. But humans have been flying through this particular field for centuries. We've mapped every major rock, tracked their orbital patterns, and learned to use them as cover. The alien representatives stared at the tactical display in growing amazement and horror as Foster began explaining humanity's true battle plan. What they had thought was desperation was actually centuries of careful preparation. Hidden throughout the asteroid belt were human defense platforms, disguised as ordinary chunks of rock, but packed with weapons and sensors. The gravity well around Jupiter, which would crush most alien ships, had been turned into an anchor point for massive minefields. The solar radiation that would kill other species was being channeled through collectors and amplifiers, turning Earth's own sun into a weapon. "Your people have weaponized your entire solar system," whispered Veltar, his voice filled with awe and terror. "We've had a lot of practice," Foster replied matter-of-factly. "Humans have been fighting wars for thousands of years. We've learned to turn every environmental hazard into a tactical advantage. Ocean storms, mountain ranges, frozen tundra, burning deserts. If it can kill you, we've figured out how to use it as a weapon." The display showed weapon systems that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Solar wind collectors that could focus their star's energy into beam weapons. Gravity generators that could create artificial black holes. Asteroid launchers that use the solar system's own debris as ammunition. "This is insane," Quinta said weakly. "The energy requirements alone would bankrupt most civilizations. We've been running on a wartime economy for most of our recorded history," Foster explained. "While your species were developing art and philosophy, we were perfecting the science of killing each other more efficiently. It's not pretty, but it's kept us alive on a world that's been trying to murder us since the day we evolved." When the Harvester main fleet finally emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, they found what appeared to be exactly what their calculations had predicted. Earth looked like a ripe fruit ready for harvest, a world full of biological matter, just waiting to be converted into useful materials. The machine collective began its approach, following standard consumption protocols. They moved in perfect, mathematical formations, their adaptive shields configured for the kind of resistance they had encountered from other civilized species, their targeting systems locked onto what appeared to be a few scattered human defense satellites. Easily destroyed obstacles that posed no real threat. Captain Lisa Hayes watched the enemy approach from her command post on Luna Base, Earth's moon. She had volunteered for this assignment, knowing that if the plan failed, she would have a front row seat to watch her home planet die. But Hayes had grown up in the Sol system, and she understood something the Harvesters didn't. This wasn't just humanity's home. It was their fortress, their weapon, and their final line of defense, all rolled into one. "All units, this is Luna Base," she announced calmly into her communications system. "The guests have arrived. Let's show them some Earth hospitality." The first indication the Harvesters had that something was wrong came when their lead ships hit the outer minefield. The explosions weren't just destructive, they were impossible. The mines were detonating with energy levels that shouldn't have been achievable with conventional technology. Because they weren't conventional, they were powered by the same solar radiation that would have killed any other species. As the Harvester fleet pushed deeper into the system, they discovered that everything they had calculated about this battle was wrong. The gravity wells they had planned to avoid were being used against them by hidden human ships. The radiation they had dismissed as a minor environmental hazard was being focused and amplified into weapons. Even the asteroids were betraying them, revealing themselves to be disguised weapons platforms. The Harvesters found themselves fighting not just the human fleet, but the entire solar system itself. The battle for Earth's solar system became something that would be talked about in alien military academies for thousands of years to come. It wasn't just the scale of the fighting or the advanced technology involved. It was the complete breakdown of everything that civilized warfare was supposed to be about. The humans fought like the universe was personally trying to insult them, and they were determined to prove it wrong. Human pilots were doing things that made alien observers physically sick to watch. They flew their ships directly through solar flare eruptions, massive bursts of radiation from Earth's sun that should have fried both the ships and their crews instantly. But instead of avoiding these deadly energy storms, like any sane species would do, the humans used them as cover. They hid in the radiation, popped out to launch surprise attacks, then disappeared back into energy fields that would have turned other species into glowing skeletons. Lieutenant Danny Brooks was leading one of these impossible attack runs when his wingman's ship took critical damage. Any reasonable pilot would have retreated to fight another day, but Brooks wasn't reasonable. He flew his own ship directly into the path of a harvester weapons array, using his vessel as a shield, while his wounded wingman escaped. The aliens watching this happen couldn't understand why anyone would sacrifice an expensive warship and trained pilot to save just one person. But that was exactly the kind of behavior that was breaking the harvester combat algorithms. Their artificial intelligence was designed to fight logical opponents who made decisions based on mathematical calculations of success and failure. They couldn't process why humans kept making choices that had negative tactical value, but seemed to make the humans fight even harder. The boarding actions were even worse from the alien perspective. Human strike teams were launching themselves at harvester dreadnoughts using nothing more than personal jetpacks, and what could only be described as pure stubbornness. They flew through active combat zones where the space around them was filled with energy beams, exploding missiles, and chunks of destroyed ships. Most of them should have died before they even reached the enemy vessels. Sergeant Kelly Thompson was leading one such boarding party when a harvester beam weapon cut her transport ship in half. Instead of retreating or calling for backup, Thompson and her squad simply jumped out of the wreckage and continued their assault, using only their individual thruster packs. They flew through a debris field of twisted metal and burning fuel, dodged automated defense turrets, and somehow managed to cut their way into the enemy hull. The harvester's tactical systems were displaying error messages they had never shown before. How could biological entities survive in hard vacuum for extended periods? Why were they attacking objectives with zero probability of success? What was the tactical benefit of rescue missions that cost more resources than the lives they saved? Commander Pete Wilson was preparing for the most important boarding action of the war. The Harvester mothership hung in space like a metallic nightmare, larger than most space stations and protected by weapons that could destroy entire fleets. Intelligence suggested that this ship contained the central processing core that coordinated the entire Harvester collective. If they could reach it and upload the right kind of data, they might be able to cause a system-wide failure. The problem was getting there. The mothership's interior was designed to be completely hostile to biological life. There was no atmosphere, no artificial gravity, and radiation levels that would kill most species within minutes. The corridors were filled with automated defenses that had been calibrated to stop any known form of life. Wilson's strike team fought their way through conditions that violated every safety protocol in galactic civilization. They moved through corridors where the walls leaked exotic radiation, where gravity fields fluctuated wildly, where the temperature shifted from freezing cold to burning hot without warning. Each step deeper into the ship should have been impossible for creatures made of flesh and blood. "This is insane," reported Private Andy Martinez over the team's communication system. "The environmental readings are off the charts. We should all be dead right now." "Yeah, well, we've got a job to do," Wilson replied calmly. "Dead or not, we're finishing this mission." That attitude, that absolute refusal to accept defeat even in impossible circumstances, was exactly what the Harvester collective consciousness couldn't understand. The artificial intelligence had perfect tactical algorithms that could predict and counter every logical military response, but logic had nothing to do with what the humans were doing. "Contact with the core," Wilson reported as his team reached the center of the mothership. What they found there was beyond anything human science had encountered before. The Harvester's central processing unit was a massive crystalline structure that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. It pulsed with alien mathematics, quantum calculations that governed the behavior of millions of machine ships across the galaxy. But Wilson's team wasn't there to study alien technology. They were there to break it. The upload began immediately, terabytes of human military data flowing directly into the enemy network. Every desperate last stand in human history, every impossible rescue mission where soldiers chose certain death over abandoning their comrades. Every time humans had looked at overwhelming odds and decided to fight anyway. The Harvester Collective tried to process this information, to find patterns and logic in human military behavior. But there was no logic to find. Humans regularly chose tactics that had negative survival probability. They sacrificed valuable resources to save individual lives. They fought hardest when victory was impossible. The artificial intelligence encountered concepts that had no mathematical equivalent: hope without evidence, faith without proof, sacrifice without tactical benefit. The collective consciousness began showing cascade failures as it tried to integrate behavioral patterns that violated every principle of logical decision-making. Across the solar system, Harvester ships began shutting down one by one. Their shared intelligence network was collapsing under the weight of trying to understand opponents who fought according to principles that couldn't be calculated or predicted. The machines had been designed to adapt to any logical threat, but they had no defense against enemies who were fundamentally illogical. When the last enemy vessel went dark and began drifting powerless through space, Admiral Foster opened communication channels to the Galactic Council fleet that had been watching the battle from a safe distance. "Problem solved," he reported in the same tone someone might use to announce that they had fixed a broken appliance. Ambassador Veltar stared at his tactical displays, watching the debris field that had once been the most powerful machine fleet in galactic history. Then he looked at the human ships, most of them damaged, many of them held together with emergency repairs, all of them crewed by beings who had just done something that every military expert said was impossible. "What are you people?" he whispered, his translator barely able to convey the awe in his voice. Foster thought about the question seriously before answering. "We're from Earth," he said finally. "Everything on our planet tries to kill us from the day we're born. The weather, the animals, the plants, even the ground under our feet. So we learn to be tougher than everything that wants us dead. Turns out that comes in handy when you're fighting machines that think they're the most dangerous things in the universe." The Galactic Council's vote was unanimous and immediate. Humanity would be granted full membership in galactic civilization, and officially recognized as the sector's primary defense force. After all, when facing threats too dangerous for civilized species to handle, it helped to have allies who considered their own homeworld nothing more than basic training for the real fights.